Well, well, well. Look what the universe finally dared to do. After all those years of calling you too much, after all those warnings about your intensity, after all those people who ran screaming from your fire, the cosmos had the audacity to create another you. Not a clone, no. That would have been far too simple. They forged your opposite reflection, your perfect contradiction, your equal match in madness. And now those same people who once called you dangerous are watching two forces of nature collide and realizing they never had a clue what danger really meant. They thought they had you figured out, didn't they? She's chaos, unpredictable, wild. The storm that never warns before ripping the roof off. He's control, calculated, precise. The blade so sharp, you don't feel the cut until you're already empty. Separately, you are containable. Separately, they could box you in with labels, therapies, concerned interventions. But nobody, and I mean nobody, was ready for what happens when chaos finds its conductor and control finds its catalyst. You remember the exact moment, don't you? That first meeting wasn't romance. It was recognition, like staring into a warped mirror. That shows not who you are, but who you could become. She walked in like she owned the building's collapse. He stood there as if he'd planned every falling brick. And in that space between heartbeats, in that moment before words could ruin everything, you both knew. This wasn't love at first sight. This was conspiracy at first contact. The room shifted temperature. People shuffled in their seats without knowing why. Conversations stuttered to silence. Because everyone there, every single person with functioning survival instincts, felt it. Two predators had just recognized each other. Not as prey, not as competition, but as something far more terrifying. Partners. And in that recognition, the entire social ecosystem shuddered, knowing its days were numbered. Of course, they tried to stop it, didn't they? Friends pulled you aside with their rehearsed concern. This isn't healthy, they whispered. You're too similar, they warned. You'll destroy each other, they predicted. But what they really meant was, you'll destroy us. Because they could handle one of you. One person who sees through their masks, who calls out their games, who refuses to play by their rules. But two of you, comparing notes, validating each other's observations, confirming that, yes, the world really is as fake as you always suspected. That's not a relationship. That's a revolution. She brought the chaos he'd been suffocating under, all his control, every perfectly planned moment he had constructed. She detonated with a laugh, not to hurt him, but to free him, to show him that his control was just another cage. Zaka and she held the keys. She would walk into his meticulously organized life and scatter everything. Not with malice, with joy. Look, her existence whispered. Look how beautiful it is when you stop trying to hold it. He brought the structure her chaos had been craving, not to contain her, but to channel her, like lightning finally finding a rod that doesn't melt. But he never tried to calm her storms. Instead, he taught them where to strike. He would watch her burn everything down and quietly hand her matches. But better ones, specific ones. If you're going to destroy, his presence said, let's make sure it's the right things. They called it toxic. They called it codependent. They called it dangerous. They threw every psychological term they could find, hoping something would stick, hoping you'd see yourselves through their fearful eyes and run. But you both just smiled. Because when you've been called crazy your whole life, finding someone who speaks your language isn't toxic, yet home. And they couldn't stand that you'd found it in each other. Here's what they never understood about chemistry. When you mix chaos and control, you don't get balance. You don't get some watered-down, middle-ground mediocrity. You get alchemy. You get transformation. You get something entirely new. something that makes both elements more themselves than they ever were alone. She didn't become less chaotic. She became precisely chaotic. He didn't become less controlled. He became lethally controlled. Together he started seeing the patterns. She created chaos that revealed people's true natures. He documented every reaction, every tell, every weakness laid bare. She was the earthquake shaking foundations. He was the engineer who knew exactly which ones would fall apart. You were natural disasters and architects. Together, you were intelligent design with a vengeance. The first time you truly worked together, it happened almost by accident. Someone had wronged her, dismissed her, tried to gaslight her reality. Old her would have exploded, giving them the dramatic reaction they were expecting. But then, she looked at him, and he smiled that smile. The one that says, "Oh, we're going to have so much fun with this." She brought the fury, he brought the plan, and together, you delivered something that person still wakes up in cold sweats about. That's when you realized this wasn't just about finding someone who understood you. This was about finding someone who amplified you, someone who didn't just add to your power, but multiplied it exponentially. She didn't just bring chaos to his control. She brought the chaos his control had been waiting its entire life to weaponize. He didn't just bring structure to her storm. He brought the structure that turned her storm into a precision instrument. The changes started small. She stopped apologizing for her intensity because he celebrated it. He stopped hiding his calculations because she saw them as art. You both stopped explaining yourselves to people committed to misunderstanding you. Why waste words on the willfully blind when you could spend that energy becoming something they couldn't even begin to comprehend? Your communication evolved past a language. A glance could carry entire strategies. A touch could initiate synchronized destruction. You developed your own frequency, your own code, your own reality. It existed parallel to everyone else's, but was infinitely more real. They'd watch you in public, baffled by how you moved like one organism with two bodies, how you responded to each other's thoughts before they were spoken. She taught him that control without chaos is just fear wearing a three-piece suit, that his precision was beautiful, but precision that could dance. That was unstoppable. She'd take his carefully laid plans and add jazz to them. Not enough to break them, just enough to make them sing, just enough to turn strategy into art. He taught her that chaos without purpose is just noise, that her fire was magnificent, but fire that knew where to burn. That was revolution. He'd take her raw power and add targeting systems to it, not to diminish it, but to make every explosion count, to turn destruction into the construction of something better. People started noticing, not just in how you acted, but in how reality itself seemed to bend around you. Rooms reorganized themselves when you entered. Conversations shifted to topics you wanted without you saying a word. People who'd wronged either of you began having mysteriously bad luck. Not traceable, not provable, just consistent. They whispered about you, sometimes in fear, sometimes in awe, always in confusion. What are they? Became the question nobody could answer. Because you weren't something they had categories for. You weren't a regular couple. You weren't even a power couple. You were something new. Something that shouldn't exist according to their rules about how relationships work, how people work, how reality works. She'd walk into meetings like a hurricane, in human form. He'd follow like the eye of the storm, calm, centered, but carrying the promise of what comes after. They'd try to separate you, divide and conquer, play you against each other. But how do you separate chaos from its purpose? How do you divide control from its power source? You can't. You just can't. And the most unsettling part for them, you were happy. Genuinely, disturbingly happy. Not the fake happiness they parade on social media. Not the desperate happiness of people trying to convince themselves. The kind of happiness that comes from finally being seen, finally being understood, finally being met with equal force. The kind of happiness that doesn't need external validation, because it generates its own gravity. But happiness, when worn by the dangerous, looks like a threat. Your joy became their terror, because happy predators are hunting predators. Happy storms are storms that have found their purpose. Happy architects of destruction are architects who have found their perfect demolition partner. And the two of you weren't just happy, you were ecstatic. They tried interventions, friends, family, even concerned strangers who had heard whispers about you two. They came armed with their rehearsed speeches about healthy relationships, about codependency, about how you were enabling each other's worst traits, and you'd listen politely, she barely containing her laughter, he silently cataloging every manipulative tactic they used. Then you'd thank them for their concern, and do exactly what you were going to do anyway, only now, with the added amusement of their horror. Because here's what they never understood. You weren't enabling each other's worst traits. You were revealing each other's best ones. What they called chaos, you called authenticity. What they called control, you called focus. What they called dangerous, you called finally fucking alive. She wasn't making him worse. She was making him more. He wasn't making her worse. He was making her precise. Together you started rewriting the rules. Not the big obvious ones, the subtle ones. The social contracts everyone signs without reading. The invisible boundaries that keep people small. She'd identify them with her chaos. He'd dismantle them with his control. Together you created spaces where those rules simply didn't exist. Pockets of reality, where authenticity beat politeness, where power beat permission, where truth beat comfort, every single time. Your reputation preceded you now, not by minutes, but by miles. People knew you were coming before you arrived, not because anyone told them, but because they could feel the shift in atmosphere, the way conversations suddenly became more honest, the way fake smiles got harder to hold, the way the whole social fabric began showing its seams. He had a way of making people reveal themselves, not through interrogation, but simply by existing. Her chaos was a mirror that exposed their rigidity. Her freedom revealed their cages. Her joy in destruction exposed their desperate clinging to broken systems. And she did it all with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass and healing wounds at the same time. He had a way of making people doubt their reality, not through gaslighting, but through clarity. His control revealed their lack of it. His precision exposed their sloppiness. His calm in the face of their storms showed them that emotions are choices, not unstoppable forces of nature. And he did it all with a stillness that felt like the moment before an earthquake. Together, you were a walking apocalypse in Sunday clothes. You'd arrive at gatherings and watch people unconsciously form alliances, not against you, but for the transformation they knew was coming. Because where you two went, change followed. Not the gentle kind, the kind that leaves scars, the kind that builds character, the kind that burns away everything false. Your methods became legendary. She'd create the distraction, while he planted the seeds. She'd be the obvious threat everyone watched, while he quietly rearranged the entire playing field. By the time people realized what was happening, it was already done. The game was already over. They were just playing out the final moves of a match decided 3 conversations ago. You developed a language of destruction, not verbal, but tactical. She knew exactly how much chaos to inject, to reveal what he needed to see. He knew exactly which structures to leave standing, to channel her chaos where it needed to go. You became each other's weapons and shields simultaneously, each other's ammunition and armor. The beauty was in the improvisation. No two operations were the same, because no two targets were the same. She'd read the room's energy like sheet music and improvise a symphony of disruption. He'd conduct her chaos like a maestro who understood that the best performances come from knowing when to control and when to let go. Together you created experiences people couldn't forget, lessons they couldn't unlearn, truths they couldn't unsee. They started calling you names: the dangerous duo, the chaos couple, the architects of anarchy. But names are for things that can be categorized, and you defied every category they tried to force you into. You weren't villains. Villains want to rule the world. You weren't heroes. Heroes want to save it. You were something else entirely. You were evolution in action, showing everyone what they could be if they stopped being afraid of their own power. The ripples of your union spread wider than anyone anticipated. People who'd never met you started changing their behavior because they'd heard stories. Your existence became a permission slip for others to stop pretending, to stop playing small, to stop apologizing for their intensity. You became accidental mentors to people who saw in your partnership what was possible when you stopped trying to fit in. She inspired the quiet ones to find their voice, not by preaching, but by being. Every time she walked into a room unapologetically herself, she gave someone else permission to do the same. Her chaos wasn't destructive for destruction's sake. It was destructive, like winter is destructive, clearing away the dead things so new growth could happen. He inspired the loud ones to find their power, not by teaching, but by demonstrating. Every time he achieved more with stillness than others did with noise, he showed them a different way. His control wasn't about domination. It was about mastery, self-mastery. That made external control unnecessary, because when you master yourself, the world rearranges itself around you. The second you stop learning, you together, you became a living testament to what happens when you stop trying to be understood by people who benefit from misunderstanding you. When you stop seeking approval from people who need you to be less so they can feel like more. When you stop explaining your fire to people who live in ice and call it safety. The fear you inspired wasn't the simple fear of violence or unpredictability. It was existential. You represented the possibility that everything they'd built their lives on was wrong, that all their compromises, all their self-betrayals, all their mature decisions to play it safe were just cowardice dressed in wisdom's clothes. Your existence asked the question they couldn't answer. What if you didn't have to choose between being powerful and being loved? Because that's what terrified them most. You were both powerful and loved, chaotic and directed, controlled and free. You shattered their binary thinking just by breathing. She didn't have to sacrifice her wildness to be cherished. He didn't have to sacrifice his precision to be passionate. He proved you could be complete individuals and a unified force at the same time. They watched you at gatherings, searching for the crack, the weakness, the proof this couldn't last. They waited for the explosion, the breakdown, the inevitable destruction they'd predicted. But what they got instead was worse for their worldview. They got consistency. They got growth. They got two people becoming more themselves every single day, powered by each other's presence. The women watched her and wondered why they'd been taught to dim their fire. The men watched him and wondered why they'd been taught to fear their focus. Everyone watched you both and questioned why they'd been taught that power couples are about competition when you showed them it's about amplification. Here's the truth they couldn't stomach. You found in each other what you'd been told didn't exist. Not completion. You were already complete. Not fixing. Neither of you were broken. What you found was recognition. Pure, undiluted recognition of another soul that spoke the same frequency, that heard the same truths, that saw the same patterns everyone else was blind to. She recognized in him the control she'd been told was oppression, but was actually liberation. The kind of control that doesn't cage, but creates space. The kind that doesn't limit, but launches. He wasn't trying to control her chaos. He was giving it a stage, worthy of its performance. He recognized in her the chaos he'd been told was destruction, but was actually creation. The kind of chaos that doesn't end, but begins. The kind that doesn't just destroy, but transforms. She wasn't trying to destroy his control. She was teaching it how to dance. Together, you recognized the world had been lying about what relationships could be. They'd sold you fairy tales about completion and compromise, about becoming less, so someone else could be more. But you discovered the radical truth. The right person doesn't complete you. They amplify you. They don't make you whole. They make you more. Now they watch you with a mix of fear and fascination. The smart ones take notes. They see how she creates space for his precision to become art. They see how he builds structure for her chaos, to find purpose. They see how you move through the world, like you're playing a game everyone else doesn't know they're in. Your legacy isn't in what you destroy, though you destroy plenty. It's in what you reveal. Every interaction with you strips away another layer of pretense. Every conversation peels back another lies people tell themselves. You're walking truth serums, and most people aren't ready for their own truth, but some are. Some see you and think, if they can be that free, that powerful, that authentically themselves, and be loved for it, maybe. And that maybe is your real weapon, because maybes become possibilities, and possibilities become attempts. Attempts become transformations, and transformations, well, transformations are contagious. You didn't set out to change the world. You set out to be yourselves, fully and unapologetically, but in a world built on everyone being less than themselves. Being fully yourself is revolution, and being two people, fully themselves, amplifying each other, that's not revolution, that's evolution. And evolution doesn't ask permission. They ask about your future, like they're hoping for an expiration date. How long can this intensity last? They wonder, waiting for burnout, for normalization, for you to settle into something they can understand. But they're asking the wrong questions. They're measuring your fire by their ashes. They're timing your storm by their drizzle. The future isn't something you're moving toward. It's something you're creating with every synchronized step, every shared glance, every perfectly orchestrated chaos. She dreams in explosions. He plans in precision. Together you blueprint revolutions over breakfast and execute them before dinner. Your future terrifies them because it isn't built on their foundations. It isn't following their timeline. Marriage? Maybe, but not their kind. Success? Absolutely, but not their definition. Children? Perhaps, but raised as forces of nature, not obedient citizens. Every choice you make rewrites what's possible, and they can't predict what you'll rewrite next. The truth is, your future is already here. It arrived the moment you recognized each other. Everything since then has been the unfolding of what was always inevitable. Two forces of nature, finally aimed in the same direction, finally given permission to be exactly as powerful as they always were. Here's the warning, though it's already too late for most. You can't stop this. You can't separate them. You can't return them. to who they were before they found each other. That version died the moment recognition sparked. What you're dealing with now isn't two dangerous individuals who happened to meet. You're dealing with a new species of partnership. She will never again accept being told her fire is too much when she's found someone who brings gasoline. He will never again accept being told his control is too rigid when he's found someone who taught him how to make it flow. They've tasted what it's like to be celebrated for their extremes, not despite them. Try to divide them, and watch how quickly they unite. Try to turn them against each other, and watch how quickly they turn toward you instead. Not with violence. They're too evolved for that. With something worse. Attention. The kind of attention that sees through every mask, every game, every lie. You've told yourself about who you are, because that's what really scares you, isn't it? Not that they're dangerous, but that they see. She sees, with the clarity of chaos, all the patterns you try to hide in. He sees, with the precision of control, all the weaknesses you try to cover. And together, they see everything, and worse, they remember.